Welcome back to another investigation reveal with the Ghost History Medium. This is our location number 10, which was Ghost Lake, the Fairy Cave, and Shades of Death Road. To be very honest, this probably is one of my absolute favorite locations to date. And it's because there's so many legends, and actually what I ended up experiencing aligned a lot with previous legends that have been reported. But also it took me way, way back into the past, much further than I ever thought I'd be able to experience an individual. So we're going to start talking about Jenny Jump State Forest. Then we're going to go into Native Americans 10,000 years ago in this area. And we'll finish up talking about the Shades of Death roads and all the legends, or not. So this area abounds with legends, and the name of Jenny Jump State Forest is one of them. Now, the forest is actually 4,466 acres, and the name is commonly referred to that back in the Revolution, early settlers' time, a girl was out gathering berries, and her father saw that there was a Native American coming. I saw references that it was an Iroquois. I saw references that it was Lenape, and he ordered her to jump to avoid capture. And so she did. She jumped off the cliff, and I read that she survived. I've also read that she was injured, but did still survive. There's another reference to this that I thought was interesting and kind of is different from the common stories that I have heard, was that a man was driving his horses down a steep part on Jenny Jump Mountain, and one of his horses started to spook, and his wife was in there, and he told his wife, Jenny, to jump, which she did, and it actually saved her life. So, and the jump was jumping off the cart and the carriage, probably down an embankment. But this is just a unique take on the two legends that are associated with the state forest name. Like usual, let's get some orientation. So the map in the upper right is map of northern New Jersey, and the red marker is where the Fairy Cave is in relation to New York City. And then the map on the left is a bit closer, and you can see that Jenny Jump State Forest is all of that green area. The pond is Ghost Lake, and the star is where we were doing our investigation. Where the marker is, that's Shades of Death Road. And as you can see on the right-hand side, I just put another map here just to show how green and dense the area is here. And the marker again is where we were at our location, and the road going down is Shades of Death Road. Okay, so remember I said that this road had wagons all the way back from like 1810 to 1910? Well, that's absolutely true. So these are two different maps, one from 1852 and one from 1874, showing the Shades of Death Road and the star where we were doing our investigation. Now, one thing I really want you to get from this is that this big place here is called Great Meadows, and that's a giant swamp at this point in time in 1874. Also, as you can see near the star where we were doing our investigation, there is no pond, and we're going to get to that. But this road here is Shades of Death Road, and it was obviously present on these maps back then. Now, I think the history of the road goes back even further than that, and we're going to go ahead and get into that later on. So the last thing I'm going to talk about for Jenny Jump is its rock history. So remember I was in the cave and I was talking about Precambrian, and I thought I was referring to the Native Americans that were back there, but Precambrian actually is like way even before the dinosaurs. So I was wondering why like that word was coming up in my head. Well, it turns out that the rock that actually makes up this cave, and then there's another glacial boulder that's on top of Jenny Jump Mountain, actually are Precambrian rock. And I know that because it's been described that the rock in the Fairy Cave, or that makes up the Fairy Hole or Fairy Cave, is gneiss rock. It's spelled Gneiss, but it's gneiss rock, and gneiss rock is dated to Precambrian time frame. So I thought that was really cool, and I'm not really sure how I picked up on information about rock history, but that at least lines up. Okay, so let's check out what this is all about Native Americans 10,000 years ago. This was probably one of the most exciting encounters that I've had so far in my adventures doing Ghost History Medium. Why? Because I saw Native Americans who looked very closely to this picture on the left here. And it took me a really long time to find images on the internet that actually accurately reflected what I saw. The only other time I've seen Native Americans look like this were those wax models at the Natural Museum of History in New York City. So this was super cool for me. Now, where did these Native Americans and what time did they come from? So they're considered Paleo-Indian or Archaic Native Americans, and they're about 12,000 to 5,000 years ago. Now, after I realized that, wow, these could actually be that old, I had to really figure out how to prove this evidence that this age of Native Americans could have even been in this cave. So there are, in fact, Paleo-Indian artifact sites in New Jersey. The map on the right shows different archaeological sites where artifacts have been found dating back to this time frame. And the star is where we did our investigation. And as you can see, there are multiple sites around where we were at. In addition, there's a really famous dig site called the Plenge, which is here at number 2, which is just south of where we were. So what does this area even look like way back then? What does New Jersey look like? Well, about 14,000 to 10,000 years ago, there was a glacier that was all the way down here, which actually formed the very highlands of New Jersey as well as Long Island. This was called the Wisconsin Glacier. And what I love on this map on the left is it's actually outlining Jenny Jump State Forest with that red dot on the left, and it shows it right next to that green line, which indicates the late Wisconsin stage. Now, one other thing in this area is that there were lakes that are not here anymore, and where the Great Meadows area is today was actually a giant glacial lake. And although it's not shown on the map on the right, you can see where another lake of its size was called the Great Swamp area. So when I was talking about seeing a big lake and lots of Native Americans around this lake in this big area that was really deep, it's possible that I was still referencing the same area, but I was talking about this ancient glacial lake back 10,000 years ago. So how do we know that Native Americans were actually in this cave? Well, there was multiple archaeological digs. One of them was in 1936 by Dorothy Cross. And this is a picture of her archaeological team there in front of the cave, which I love. And then on the right is a schematic of what a 2D schematic of what the cave looks like. And the star in the front is where we were doing the beginning, and then the star in the back of the cave is where we were sitting. And you can see that there's this little tail end here where I was seeing the early band of Native Americans. Well, it turns out this tail end here actually does have a flume chute that goes up out of multiple cracks in the rock. So it is possible that they could have had a fire back there and they would not have been smothered because the smoke would have gone up through the flume up there. So what this group found were arrowheads. They found a lot of animal bones, and they even found some pottery and some bits. They didn't find as much as they thought they would have found for such a large cave. And they suspect that this probably was not a location that they permanently lived in, which would make sense, and I'll show you later on why. But they did find artifacts. One of the ways that archaeologists date a location to see when Native Americans were there is they can actually date the arrowheads. And this picture on the left is showing various time frames that are associated with different kinds of arrowheads. And you can see all the way down at the bottom is Paleo-Indian and Archaic arrowheads, and these are considered fluted points. Now, in fact, a fluted point was recovered at the ferry hole, so this would actually date Paleo-Native Americans and Archaic Native Americans being in this cave at some point in time in the past. Another piece of evidence that was amazing from their archaeological dig was they actually uncovered a giant beaver tooth. Now, giant beavers are obviously extinct now, but they were one of the big game animals that was around back in the Pleistocene era when there were Archaic and Paleo-Native Americans. Now, this is a skeleton on the right of a giant beaver, and on the left shows the size difference of a giant beaver, a regular beaver, and a person. So the tooth that was found was carbon dated to 11,000 years ago, and its association with the artifacts in the shelter, including a fluted point, is not clear. But because these two were actually there, it just shows that this cave was open and available to the Native Americans in this time frame. And also what it shows that if there was a giant beaver there, there probably was a lot of water, just like there's water there today, or, well, now there's a giant swamp called the Great Meadows, but it just shows that there definitely was a lake in the area that a beaver would have used. And the other thing that was of note was the Native Americans were talking about big game, big fish, big turtle, and I didn't really know what they were talking about, but the Pleistocene mammals, such as mastodons and giant beavers, were around during the time of archaic Native Americans, which was why their fluted points had to be so big so they could actually take down this big game. And they were considered big game hunters, and it would make sense that they would be talking about those things at this location during that time frame. And as if we needed more evidence of this big game being in the area at the time, these are sites in northern New Jersey where there have been mastodon bones recovered. And the star on the left is where we were doing our investigation. As you can see, there are multiple areas where mastodon bones have been recovered. And a site in the Great Meadows is also a place where multiple mastodons have been found. And mastodons are around in the Pleistocene era, which is exactly when the Paleo-Native Americans and Archaic Native Americans would have been living. What other kind of evidence is out there of Native Americans being in the area? Well, this is a map of archaeologic sites that have recovered Native American artifacts. So the yellow circle is where we were doing our investigation. All of these dots are sites where Native American artifacts have been found. The crosses are rock shelters, and the circles are established Native American campsites where they have been there for longer than just a short stay over, but they were more established there. So as you can see, this whole entire area is completely inundated. And there's, according to local tradition, there wasn't a burial place near David's old silver mine. And on the next map, I'll show you where that is. And it's about 3/4 of a mile southwest of the rock shelter that we were at. And also, there's information about a prehistoric burial site on the summit of Jenny Jump Mountain, which is in the direction that I was looking at. I kept saying, I want to look up to the mountain, I want to look up to that hill, I want to look up to that hill. And Jenny Jump Mountain is in that direction of the hill. So let's come back to a little bit more recent Native American history. So this is a map of the Lenape footpaths, and the Fairy Hole and Rock Shelter is actually outlined on this. And what I did is I put a yellow line which is representing the Shades of Death Road. And it's very plausible that this could have been an ancient footpath connector from the Alamatunk Trail to the Minnesink Trail, meaning that this trail could have been traversed by Native Americans for hundreds to thousands of years. So I think through this PowerPoint, I've been able to prove that, yes, it is possible that Paleo-Archaic Native Americans could have been in this cave back then, and that's exactly what I could have seen as a small band. They could have been hunting big game, especially mastodons, big beaver, big turtle, big fish. And if this whole area was under a lake, like Great Meadows was supposed to have been back in the glacial time period, it's definitely possible that it was a big, giant waterway that they came there for food and for hunting. Now, this is different in time from the gentleman who greeted me at the front as the sentry of the cave. This was more of a late woodland individual, and why I say that is because he had tattoos in his face, his clothing was more recognizable, and he had his hair up that was done just like they would have in the Lenape culture. It was also common for them to have tattoos in their face, which is what he had. It would also make sense for him to be acting as a sentry, and it's interesting because this cave does not seem to have been used as a living place, but it was commonly thought that caves were used as spiritual locations, and because of these multiple burial grounds in the area, especially the archaic one on top of Jenny Jump Mountain and the one only 3/4 of a mile away, and also those very established villages just to the south of where we were, it's possible that this gentleman was there protecting the entire area. And that's kind of what he appeared to me, is that he was just kind of protecting and representing his family and his heritage in this area. Now, going back to what this sentry said to me, it was like Mankakwa. And again, I'm using the Lenape Talking Dictionary, which anybody can do online. It's a wonderful resource and has helped me so much. Some things that were trending from this were Manitou, which is spirit in Lenape, and Kakua, which is to you people. So is it possible that he said Manitou Kakua, which is spirit to you people, which would be how he was describing himself to me, is he was calling himself a spirit to me. That's very plausible, especially considering that I was using mediumship to communicate with him. A few other words could have made sense, like Manitou Wakan, which is power from a spirit. These other words came up that were similar in pronunciation and as far as spelling. They were servants, power from a spirit, he answers you people, we have big legs, and a sense of feeling or touch. And to be honest, I could make sense out of all of these. It's possible he was saying that he was a servant of his people as being a sentry, or maybe that's just the word that they used for sentries. Power from a spirit? Again, that's very possible that he was using power from spirit to communicate. He answers you people? Yes, he was answering us with questions. I can't really place the we have big legs other than, I'm sure we as Americans are much bigger than Native Americans were in weight-wise. And the last one is sense of feeling or touch. When I communicate with spirit, I do get sensations on my body. Sometimes I'll get tingling or cold feeling. So he could have been talking about that he was giving me those sensations, and that was him. Okay, let's finish up talking about some of the legends. Let's start with Ghost Lake. Now, remember I was saying in the cave the whole time, something is fake, and I thought it was the cave. Something about the cave was fake, which may still be true, but I couldn't find any evidence to suggest this. But what actually is fake is the lake. And during filming, Kyle even asked me, he was like, "Are you talking about the lake?" And I said, "No, I'm talking about the cave." But apparently I was getting it mixed up because this lake, it's man-made. And actually 2 men back in the 1900s actually dammed up this lake, and it was done after Dorothy Cross had done her archaeologic investigation in 1936. And actually one of the men that's responsible for doing this is this man on the left, Bill Cruz. He has lived on this area for over 35 years, and this is a picture of him on the left holding the sign of Shades of Death Road. So him and another man actually decided to dam this area because they wanted a swimming hole. And what's so funny is after they did that, they called the area Haunted Hollow, and apparently it got the name of Ghost Lake because of all the wispy and mistiness on the lake surface. There are legends that you can see ghosts walking on the surface, and there's also legends of orbs down one of the roads. Where this orb has been spotted is actually on the end of this road over here on the right, which is Lenape Lane, where this green X's is where orbs have been reported. And this is actually one of the Native American burial grounds. So it's not too far away. And what I thought was that the orb was the sentry. And if this sentry is believed to be kind of a guardian of this area, I could believe that he would be a guardian over the burial ground on the end of Lenape Lane, as well as the cave. So the legends of Shades of Death Road, there are many, many, many legends, and none of them are really confirmed. One thought is that this road actually was called just Shades, and it was called Shades because of how overgrown it was, and also the fact that it was on the eastern side of the Jenny Jump Mountains, so it was more shaded as the sun went down. So this kind of created an area where, for example, wildcats could come and hunt down people, and there's legends of them actually killing people, and then this got the name of Cat Swamp. There's also legends that highwaymen would hide out in this area and rob people and kill them as they went by, again, because it was so shaded and there's lots of cliffs and hills around. There are stories of murders, mostly between 1920 and 1930. One about a man being robbed and hit over the head. There's another one of a husband being beheaded and his head being buried on one side of the road and his body being buried on the other by his wife. There's another story of Bill Cummins, who was shot and buried on his property. Another common legend was how this road got its name, was that because this was in a giant swamp area where mosquitoes were breeding, there was a bout of malaria. And this happened in the 1860s to 1870s where people were getting sick. And because of this, and because they wanted to farm this area, obviously swamp areas have really rich earth underneath that they can farm. The Great Meadows was drained starting in 1872. So remember we read it on the map over here on the right from 1874. Well, no longer is that area an entire swamp. What's also really interesting is they started to sell peat and they started growing celery and onions. And to this day, there are peat farmers in this area that sell this rich humus to other farmers. To be honest, I can't really confirm or refute any of these. Again, it's amazing how legend just keeps adding on top of one another without having any such confirmation. It would be such a cool book for somebody, a real historian, to go back and really try and deep down and find out where this crazy name of this street came from. Lastly, I'm going to finish up referencing this very significant event in history in Warren County and Sussex County. And I only mention it because it kind of lines up with the story that I was getting when I started looking into the name of Shades of Death Road. Now, I was talking about a time frame of 1765 when 4 individuals were murdered by a group of Native Americans, and they were trying to get revenge. This almost lines up entirely to an event that happened not far from where we were, but not really right where we were, of the 1756 Hunt Swartwout massacre. Now, what happened was after the Walking Treaty in 1737, the Native Americans and Lenape Native Americans started to rebel because it was a very unfair treaty. And a group of Native Americans crossed the Delaware and they wanted to hunt down some of the men who signed that treaty. And they went to the house of 3 of the men who signed it. They killed one of their wives and 3 of the children. And then they eventually killed one of the men, Anthony Swartwout. And how they killed him was that they sliced his belly and left his innards open. I know it's pretty gross. It's just interesting because that was also one of the things I was picking up when I was intuiting about this massacre that happened, about something about the belly being sliced open, and that could have been referencing him. Now, I'm not sure why I was picking up on this information so far from the location where it actually happened. It's about 11 miles away. It could be that this story still really needs to be talked about, and there was also a reference in the newspaper article on the left that was talking about the bodies being carried 7 miles away and dumped in a river. I mean, it's possible that those bodies were actually brought to a river down closer to where we were, and that's why this story was coming up. This massacre event started a chain reaction of the colonials in the area, and it started the hostilities between the Native Americans and the colonials that lasted until the Native Americans were entirely kicked out of New Jersey. So that wraps up the investigation reveal for Ghost Lake, Fairy Cave, and Shades of Death Roads. Again, Jenny Jump State Forest, it's all public. You can go there tomorrow. You can go fishing, hiking. It's a beautiful spot. Just be careful, be respectful. Native Americans have been there, and their history has been there for thousands of years. So just go there with reverence and respect. And who knows, maybe one of the legends will show up for you.